What would you do if a judge pointed at you in open court and said, "I find you guilty because I want to"? And what if the very next day that same judge stood in handcuffs before you, yet leaned in and whispered, "You will pay for this"? This isn't a movie. This is the real story of attorney Gabriel Vaughn, the man who dared to turn an entire corrupt system on its head to defend a wrongfully convicted boy. But that first victory, it was only the doorway to a nightmare. Before we step into a story filled with blood, smoke, and betrayal, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment "Justice" if you believe that sometimes the truth needs someone reckless enough to set it free. Let's begin. Gabriel Vaughn stood tall in the courtroom of Crescent Hollow, his back straight, but in Judge Genevieve Clark's eyes, he was nothing more than a thorn to be plucked out and discarded. On the defendant's bench sat Julian Carter, a 22-year-old mechanic with trembling hands, head bowed, eyes wide with panic, as if waiting for a verdict that had been carved in stone long before he ever entered the room. "He's guilty, because I said so." Clark's voice cut through the silence. Sharp, cruel, absolute. No one dared breathe. The sound of her gavel wasn't the end of a trial. It was the opening shot of a war for justice. Gabriel took a breath, his fingers quivering as they rested on the case file. He knew what he was up against wasn't just injustice. It was a system built to crush anyone bold enough to defy it. Everything about this case had reeked from the start. Flimsy evidence, nervous witnesses, and a judge who had quietly dismissed every case involving a black defendant, winning for over 30 years. But what Gabriel couldn't walk away from, what made his blood boil, was the way Julian had looked at him, like he was clinging to one last sliver of hope, that someone, anyone, would finally do the right thing, no matter what it cost, even if that cost was everything. When Clark delivered her final words for the day, her tone oozed mockery. "If you interrupt me one more time, Mr. Vaughn, I'll have your license revoked before sunset." And Gabriel, he didn't flinch. He met her gaze, silent, unblinking. But in that silence, there was a declaration, a quiet, unwavering war cry. Genevieve Clark didn't need to raise her voice to assert power. All she had to do was smirk. And that one smirk was enough to cast a deathly silence over the packed courtroom of Crescent Hollow. Gabriel Vaughn knew exactly what he was up against. This wasn't a debate over law. This was a war against something buried deep in the marrow of the system. Force 1, a tyrannical court. Judge Clark pulled the strings of the jury like marionettes. When Gabriel presented the original evidence, undeniable, concrete, she waved it off like it had never existed. "We're here for the truth," she said coldly, "not your version of it." Force 2, a complicit police force. Gabriel's office at the Iron Ridge Motel was torched overnight. On the scorched wall, someone had scrawled a message in dried blood. "Next time, it won't just be paperwork." He brought the brick, still stained and wrapped in a threat, to the precinct. The white officer glanced at it, smirked, and muttered, "Kids these days. Probably just a prank." Force 3, a corrupted bar association. 3 days later, a suspension letter arrived. No hearing, no investigation. Just a single line: unprofessional courtroom conduct. Force 4, a racist mob. One late night, as Gabriel stepped away from a press conference, 3 masked men cornered him. They didn't need weapons. One of them simply spat in his face and said, "You people don't win in this city." And then came the blow from where it hurt most. Ethan, his closest friend from law school, a man Gabriel once trusted with his life. He confessed he'd sold Gabriel's strategy to Clark's team to pay off a loan. There was no hatred in Ethan's eyes, only exhaustion, surrender, and a quiet, familiar kind of fear, one Gabriel had seen in far too many men, the kind born when conscience loses the war. When the FBI stormed Crescent Hollow Courthouse and slapped handcuffs on Genevieve Clark in the middle of open court, the room exploded in disbelief. Julian wept. Lillian grabbed Gabriel's hand, whispering, "We did it." And Gabriel, for the first time in years, allowed himself to smile. But less than 6 hours later, the Iron Ridge Motel office, the very place where every document tied to the case had been stored, was swallowed by flames. Buried beneath the ash, Gabriel found a still-warm brick with a message scrawled in red ink. She fell, but we're still standing. They thought it was over, that Julian's release marked the end of the nightmare. But just 2 days later, Gabriel was served a summons, accused of setting fire to his own sister's home, where Julian had been staying. An anonymous neighbor's testimony, a fingerprint mysteriously discovered. And Julian, who hadn't even lived a full morning of freedom, was now the centerpiece of a new framed job, one Gabriel hadn't even dared imagine. When the FBI finally arrested Theodore Wells, Clark's nephew, inside the Evergrove warehouse, Gabriel thought, this has to be it. But that same night, a video surfaced online. In it, Clark, seated in her jail cell, stared straight into the camera and declared, "This is no longer about me. This is about how white people are being defamed." 12 hours later, Richmond was ablaze with violent protests, louder, fiercer, more radical than anything Gabriel had ever witnessed. When Gabriel and Lillian exposed the shadowy White Dawn Fund, unmasking millions in extremist money funneled directly into Clark's crusade, they thought, there's nothing left to hide now. But as Gabriel stepped out of Red Briar Hospital, just moments after filing the federal complaint, a sniper's bullet tore through his shoulder, splattering blood across the concrete. That night, while Richmond's streets drowned in smoke and chants of "Free Clark," Gabriel moved silently through the shadows, returning to the Evergrove warehouse. The place police suspected Julian was being held, but had refused to investigate for lack of evidence. His sniper wound hadn't healed. Every step sent a bolt of pain tearing through his shoulder. But in his hand, the phone stayed steady, still live streaming. Wind howled through the cracks in the brick. A rusted steel door creaked open. Inside, the flicker of a bare ceiling bulb and a faint, muffled moan, like someone had been gagged for hours. Gabriel didn't call for backup, didn't wait for a warrant. He simply looked into the camera and said, "If I die here, at least they'll know I didn't stay silent." Then he ended the stream and pushed the door open. Julian was tied to a wooden beam, face bruised beyond recognition, duct tape sealing his mouth. 4 masked men stood around him. One was counting down on a timer strapped to a gas canister. 45 seconds left. No time. No negotiations. Gabriel charged. A metal pipe slammed into his ribs, blood spraying, but he didn't fall. He staggered, pulled a box cutter from his jacket pocket, slashed through the rope and screamed, "Run! Don't look back!" They bolted. Seconds later, an explosion ripped through the warehouse, shattering windows down the block, flames erupting skyward like the fury of silence finally broken. Julian collapsed on the curb, sobbing like a child, clutching Gabriel with trembling arms. "They wouldn't believe me if it wasn't for you." Gabriel said nothing, but in his eyes burned the look of a man who had lost nearly everything. Just to hold on to one thing, what's right, the notarized bill of sale, the clear, composed testimony from Vincent Monroe, the garage owner, confirming that Julian Carter had paid for the car in cash. For the first time, the judge, one without the name Clark, nodded after just 5 minutes, accepting the evidence without resistance. The handcuffs were finally removed from Julian's wrists. He turned back, eyes swollen and red, and said only one thing to Gabriel. "I thought I was going to die in silence." The day Genevieve Clark was escorted away by the FBI for a second time, this time charged with terrorism funding, civil rights violations, and legal system tampering, the people flooded Belridge Cross Square in celebration. The media exploded. National broadcasts aired nonstop. The hashtag #Justice for Julian hit #1 in less than 3 hours. Standing in the storm of cheers and applause, Gabriel finally allowed himself to lift his head high. But not even 48 hours later, the signs began to appear. Free Clark. From far-right groups, from private meetings, from a campaign funded by an unnamed source. From her prison cell, Clark released a video. "I am the victim of a black conspiracy, and Vaughn is the mastermind behind it." That night, as Gabriel stepped out of a press conference, someone spit on his shirt. Another screamed in his face, "Traitor to this country!" But Gabriel didn't flinch. He simply looked into the camera held by a nearby journalist and said slowly, deliberately, "I wasn't born to win. I was born to wake the world up." And if I have to carry this cross the rest of the way, then let the world bear witness. When Vincent Monroe, the garage owner, finished testifying that Julian had paid in full and drove the car off legally, no one in the courtroom expected the reaction from the bench to be so vile. Genevieve Clark leaned forward, narrowed her eyes, and let her voice thunder across the room. I don't trust the word of one black man about another. Those people, they cover for each other too well. The silence that followed was suffocating. A female court clerk dropped her pen. Julian trembled in his seat, and Gabriel Vaughn, standing still at the defense table, hands clenched, eyes wide, looked as if the air had been knocked from his lungs. Lillian Windsor, his assistant, turned away to wipe her tears. The reporters froze. Only the shutter clicks remained, capturing the moment a judge, seated on the bench of justice, made a blatantly racist statement without a hint of shame. Gabriel stepped forward slowly. I move for an immediate suspension of this trial. That statement was unconstitutional and explicitly racist. Clark slammed the gavel, her teeth gritted. Motion denied. Say one more word and I'll have you escorted out. And in that single moment, the entire system revealed itself. No evidence, no justice, just power. Enough to crush the truth beneath its heel. As Clark stood atop the judge's bench, waving off Gabriel's every objection with smug defiance, the courtroom suddenly fell into a chilling silence. Not because of her authority, but because of the sharp echo of double doors slamming open behind her, followed by the unmistakable rhythm of leather shoes striking cold marble. Two federal agents, in crisp black suits, badges gleaming at their belts, marched straight toward the bench. The lead agent, Torres, raised a thick dossier in one hand, his voice cutting like steel. Judge Genevieve Clark, you are under arrest for bribery, document tampering, and systematic civil rights violations spanning more than a decade. Chaos erupted. Reporters leapt to their feet, cameras flashing like a storm. Gabriel stood frozen because the dream he had chased for years was finally real. Clark's face drained of color, her lips pressed into a bitter line, but she still spat out one final threat through clenched teeth. Ellison, no, Vaughn, you will pay. She was handcuffed right there on the very bench she'd used for 30 years to crush the lives of innocent black defendants. Julian, still trembling, murmured through tears, You did it, Uncle Vaughn. But that moment of victory didn't last long. Just hours later, when Gabriel returned to his modest office at the Iron Ridge Motel, his only safe haven through the storm, flames were already swallowing everything. The sign above the door was gone. Every case file turned to ash, and on a surviving brick wall, a single message was smeared in blood red. You touched Clark. Now it's your turn. He thought the battle was over, but this was only the first turn in a deeper war. Because when power is unmasked, those hiding in the shadows begin to take form. And Gabriel had just stepped into the most dangerous hornet's nest of his life. Few people knew that behind the heated courtroom battles, Gabriel Vaughn had been quietly working with Agent Lillian Windsor, the same woman Clark once forced out of the bureau for refusing to twist the truth. They weren't natural allies. Gabriel had once doubted her, even shouted at her during a stormy midnight meeting at Millgate Diner. But when Lillian placed that hard drive on the table, containing a recorded call between Clark and the head of White Dawn, he could only whisper, So the truth is worse than I imagined. From that moment, they operated in the shadows, passing files through laundromats, hiding evidence in hollowed-out law books, even using burner accounts to leak truths the press had been paid to bury. But courage comes with a cost. One night, just after Gabriel left the Evergrove warehouse, his phone rang. Lillian's voice was rushed, low, urgent. They're watching me. If I don't show up tomorrow, keep going. Don't let them snuff the flame. By morning, she was gone. Her apartment, emptied, no signs of struggle, nothing except a coffee mug on the windowsill, pressed with Clark's fingerprint, deliberately left behind like a smug signature. Gabriel stared at his computer screen, where Lillian's final video file sat unfinished, her voice trembling. If you release this, you'll become the biggest target. And he knew. The next strike wouldn't just hit his career. It would come for his life. Because now Gabriel wasn't fighting for justice. He was fighting for a promise to someone who would never make it back. Gabriel Vaughn thought he had prepared for every possibility, but nothing prepares a man for the moment he watches his ideals burn to the ground in the middle of the night. At exactly 2:14 a.m., a deafening explosion shattered the silence of Brooklyn Square. The Iron Ridge Motel office, the place where he and Lillian had stayed up late crafting lawsuits, hiding unfiled evidence, clinging to the final shreds of justice, was now nothing but rising smoke and glowing embers. Stone walls cracked wide open. The sign that once read "Vaughn and Justice" lay shattered in the street, smeared over with a jagged red warning, "Shut up or burn again." Inside the wreckage, firefighters found a scorched photo, Gabriel, Julian, and Lillian laughing together during an old interview. On the back, scrawled in dried blood, "One life for every lie." Julian dropped to his knees when he saw it, his voice trembling. This is a message. They don't just want to silence you. They want to incinerate hope." Gabriel stood in the wreckage, the stench of smoke clinging to his skin, but his gaze didn't flinch. He opened a secure channel, voice hoarse as he called out to Lillian. "They're breaking us piece by piece, but if they're burning down the office, that means we've struck their deepest fear." This wasn't about justice anymore. It was about every soul still daring to believe that truth has a place in this world. And as the flames of Iron Ridge danced in his eyes, you no longer saw a lawyer. You saw a warrior, carrying one banner, and one banner only: truth. The smoke from the Iron Ridge Motel fire hadn't even cleared when a darker truth emerged. The local police refused to investigate. Gabriel Vaughn, his clothes still reeking of ash and ruin, personally delivered his report to the Elmridge Police Department. But instead of cooperation, he was met with cold indifference and averted eyes. One officer didn't even bother to pretend, "This case is closed." "Keep pushing, and there will be consequences." Police Chief Harold Kincaid, an old associate of Clark's, calmly tore up Gabriel's photocopied evidence right in front of him, inside the department's main lobby. That was the moment Gabriel understood. This wasn't about justice anymore. The game had moved beneath the surface, down to the very foundations of the system. That night, he sat alone in his son's old bedroom, a space where laughter had long been replaced by silence. The dim glow of his laptop flickered across his weary face as he rewatched the leaked hidden camera footage. Ethan, the man who once called him brother, accepting cash from a White Dawn operative. No rescue was coming. No allies would stand beside him now. And in that moment, when every lifeline vanished, Gabriel picked up a marker and wrote a single line across the blank wall before him. A sentence that would later echo through his final live stream. "If the whole system goes silent, I'll be the first sound it hears. One man, against four forces. Not to win, just not to fall." And that's when the audience truly gave him their heart. Gabriel Vaughn thought he might find a sliver of peace at Ash Pine Cafe, a quiet corner spot on Haven Ridge Street that had once been his sanctuary during storm after storm. But that morning, serenity turned into a trap. The moment he stepped outside, he noticed a thick envelope wedged beneath his windshield wiper. Inside were photos of his son, Julian, taken from a distance, and a message scrawled in red ink. "You can't protect him forever." Before he could catch his breath, 3 masked men lunged. A blow to the neck, another to the back. They didn't steal anything. They came to leave something, etched in bruises and breathless pain. "Don't take another step." Gabriel didn't go to the hospital. He patched himself up in the back room of a cheap motel behind a laundromat, hands trembling, eyes bloodshot. But not once did he consider turning back. This wasn't just an assault. It was a test. A brutal question. Would he still move forward now that his son's life was part of the stakes? And in that flickering silence, blood dripping onto cracked tile, he whispered to no one but the dark, "If truth costs this much, then I'll pay it all." From that moment on, this was no longer a case. It was a war to reclaim the soul of a nation. The stitches on Gabriel Vaughn's forehead were still fresh as he sat in a hospital room at Redbriar Medical, surrounded by IV lines, a thick legal file, and a laptop streaming live. From what looked like the weakest place possible, he filed a lawsuit against the city, for protecting Judge Clark and made public every document he and Agent Lillian Windsor had gathered over the past year. That night, veteran journalist Everett Sinclair walked into his hospital room, not to conduct an interview, but to join the fight. "You wrote the first chapter," Everett said. "Let me broadcast it to the world." By morning, a leaked recording hit the airwaves. Clark's voice, raw and unfiltered, spewing vicious racial slurs during an internal court meeting. The country ignited. From Eastvale Square to the main avenue of Briarstone, people flooded the streets, hoisting signs high into the sky. Justice doesn't have a skin color. But amid the chants, the cameras, the thunder of marching feet, Gabriel remained quiet. He stared out the hospital window and saw Julian below, wrapped in the arms of the aunt who once tried to have him locked away in juvenile detention. And in that stillness, Gabriel thought, if I hadn't stood up that day, today might have been my son's funeral. This was no longer the story of one man. It had become a reckoning, a wake-up call for a nation that had been asleep far too long in the comfort of silence. Under mounting pressure from the public and damning evidence released by the independent investigation team, every conviction tied to Genevieve Clark's courtroom began to unravel. Those who had once stayed silent were now standing up, demanding justice for the dozens wrongfully condemned under her gavel. Among them was Julian Carter. And then, on a gray morning inside the newly reassigned courtroom at Redbrook Hall, something no one dared to expect happened. The presiding judge closed the file, looked up, and declared, "Julian Carter, not guilty." Julian broke down in tears right where he stood. Gabriel, a few rows back, said nothing, his bandaged hand clenched tight. A hero had won, but the price was never just tears. After the hearing, Lillian Windsor handed Gabriel an envelope, one she'd held onto for far too long. Inside was a trembling line, scrawled by Julian's mother before she died in despair. "If you ever go free, live enough for both of us." Gabriel froze, then looked up at the ceiling, eyes glassy, an apology whispered too late. Outside, the crowd erupted, banners reading "Justice for Julian" stretched across buildings. Online, #reclaim. The bench exploded into a national movement. But in the heart of it all, Gabriel stepped back, just one quiet step, to let Julian take the stage and the light for himself. No one knew that only hours later, his office would receive a bomb threat. But in that moment, Gabriel understood something deeper. Victory doesn't always mean defeating evil. Sometimes it means pulling a soul out from the ashes and giving it back the right to breathe. Under pressure from the remnants of a system not yet dismantled, Gabriel Vaughn received an urgent notice. The Bar Association had suspended his law license. The reason? An anonymous complaint bearing the signature of Anastasia Bennett, once his closest ally and former assistant to Judge Clark. No hearing, no chance to defend himself. Gabriel stood frozen, the paper in his hand still warm. It wasn't the betrayal of an enemy. It was the sting of someone who used to hold his robe before every trial. That night he sat alone in his half-charred office, surrounded by scorched files, staring at the photo of his mother. The same mother who once told him, "You'll never be alone if you walk the right path." But the right path was often the hardest one. The next morning, Gabriel showed up in court, no longer as an attorney, no right to speak, but his eyes found Julian across the room. And in that look was a promise. "I'm still here." A reporter pushed through the crowd, voice sharp with doubt. "Do you think you're losing?" Gabriel smiled faintly. Dried blood still streaked his temple. "Losing? I never fought to win. I fought to protect what others are trying to erase. The truth." And in a system already cracking at the seams, Gabriel's silence rang louder than any speech. A voice that needed no microphone, just a heart brave enough not to bow. Gabriel Vaughn never imagined that after all the blows from the system, what would greet him next was a fist. On his way back from a closed-door meeting with federal officials, he was ambushed in a narrow alley beside Wilhurst Station, a hood over his head, a steel pipe, and the chilling, all-too-familiar laugh of Theodore Wells, Clark's nephew, echoing in the dark. Gabriel hit the ground hard, blood soaking through his white shirt. They didn't steal anything. They left only one thing behind, a crude message scrawled in red paint across his chest. Stay quiet, race traitor. He was rushed to the hospital with a head injury and 2 fractured ribs. But when he regained consciousness, the first thing he asked Lillian Windsor wasn't about the pain. It was, Julian, does he know? He thinks you're still drafting the next appeal. Gabriel turned away, eyes brimming, not from the agony in his bones, but from something far deeper. Because he knew, kids like Julian, black kids, don't have the luxury of fear. They have to harden, grow fast, and survive in a world eager to crush anyone who dares to rise for justice. That night, barely able to speak, Gabriel opened his phone and went live. His voice raspy, fractured, but fierce. They hit me, but they've never taken me down. Because being beaten doesn't make you the loser. Being silent does. And from that hospital bed, he began again, retyping every overturned conviction Clark had signed, reclaiming every forgotten name he swore to speak out loud, with his voice. In the dusty basement archives of Sterling Hall, where only whispers and wind dared linger, Damian Blackwood, a middle-aged janitor long overlooked, stumbled upon something no one ever expected. A leather-bound notebook, its corners torn, buried deep among shredded documents marked for destruction. But what made Damian drop his broom wasn't the decay, it was the title scrawled on the first page. Private Transfers, SC to GC, Classified. SC, Sebastian Cole, GC Clark. Inside were figures, wire transfers, case references, names of defendants, including Julian Carter. At first, Damian thought about walking away. He'd once lost a job just for talking too much after witnessing a black employee being humiliated in the courthouse hallway. But this time, he didn't stay silent. He scanned every page and sent them straight to Everett Sinclair, independent journalist and Gabriel Vaughn's longtime friend. And what followed wasn't an explosion of bombs, but something louder, an explosion of truth. While Clark staged a press conference to deny all charges, Sinclair published a bombshell expose on a justice forum, complete with every scanned page of the notebook. Within 36 hours, the hashtag number Justice Leaks shot to the top of the national trend list. Gabriel, still recovering from his brutal attack, broke down when he saw the handwritten note Damian had added at the end. I don't have a law degree, but I've seen enough. This twist didn't come from a federal agent, not a lawyer, but from a man forgotten by the very system that claimed to stand for justice. And that is exactly why they couldn't silence it. When every door seemed closed, Gabriel Vaughn once again chose not to stay silent. With gauze wrapped around his forehead and his hands still trembling from the beating just days before, he stood before the lens of his phone inside the Evergrove warehouse, the rumored stronghold of Theodore Wells and the White Dawn extremist group. He didn't waste words, just 3 sentences to begin. This is where they hide the weapons. This is where they list the names of people who need to shut up. And I'm named number 1. The live stream began at 10:14 p.m. Viewers surged past 500,000 in under 4 minutes. Gabriel panned the camera across sealed wooden crates, hate symbols painted on walls, then zoomed in on a single document labeled Operation Silence. The FBI didn't need a warrant. The whole nation was watching. 18 minutes later, the roar of helicopters cut through the night sky. A tactical unit stormed the building, apprehending Wells and 4 top members of the group on the spot. Through it all, Gabriel kept the stream running, not to celebrate, but to say what might have been his last words. If I don't make it out, at least Julian will live, and this time justice will be seen clearly. He wasn't harmed, but the look in his eyes as he emerged from that warehouse wasn't the look of a lawyer. It was the look of a survivor, of someone who had walked straight into the wolf's den and told the truth anyway. From that moment on, the name Gabriel Vaughn was no longer just a man. It was a symbol. On a storm-drenched night thick with dread, Julian Carter's GPS signal went dark, its last trace frozen at the Evergrove warehouse. Gabriel Vaughn, still reeling from an earlier ambush, didn't need to guess. It wasn't coincidence. It was a message. He didn't wait. Throwing on a coat still stiff with dried blood, flashlight in one hand and a phone with a half-finished live stream in the other, Gabriel disappeared into the night, alone. Inside the warehouse was a trap, Flickering lights, the hum of wires leading to a timed explosive strapped near Julian's feet. The boy was bound, mouth sealed with tape, eyes wide with terror, staring at Gabriel like he was the last flicker of light left in the world. No rescue team, no backup, no time. "If I cut the wrong wire," Gabriel whispered, kneeling beside the bomb, hands trembling, "then at least you won't die alone." With 19 seconds left, he cut the third circuit. The countdown stopped. Julian collapsed into Gabriel's arms. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. They had both stood on the edge of oblivion and returned. And as Gabriel carried Julian out of the warehouse, still holding the phone in his pocket, the live stream stayed on. The world watched. And in that moment, they no longer saw a lawyer. They saw a father in spirit, a man willing to wager his own life to protect one innocent child. From that second forward, the story ceased to be about a court case. It became something greater, a testament that justice, though bound, though gagged, can still be saved in the final seconds by the courage of one soul who refused to walk away. Just when all faith in justice seemed moments from collapse, the final piece of evidence emerged from the last place anyone expected. An encrypted transaction log from the extremist group White Dawn surfaced, showing Genevieve Clark's name clearly listed as a recurring recipient of payments, directly from Sebastian Cole. Along with the statement came audio recordings. Clark's voice, unmistakable, ordering the erasure of records, the cleansing of trails. Everything, bank records, voice files, was sent anonymously to the Northvale Law Office with a copy attached to the FBI's case file. Gabriel Vaughn, still wrapped in bandages from the life-or-death rescue at Evergrove, read only one alert on his phone. Clark rearrested, no bail. He didn't smile. He just went quiet. Because this wasn't a victory. It was a return. Late, but necessary. The city of Northvale shook. News outlets lit up. Former supporters of Clark had nothing left but silence and bowed heads. Among them stood Gabriel, outside the law office, staring through a frosted window where Clark now sat under interrogation. Her eyes remained cold, but this time, she no longer had the power to hide behind. Behind him, Julian placed a hand gently on Gabriel's. No words were needed. The grip said everything. Later, during a quiet interview, Gabriel said what the nation had been aching to hear. No child should have to sacrifice their youth just to teach adults what justice means. The story ends here, but only as the first chapter in something greater, a beginning, where the silenced have learned this one truth. If even one person dares to stand, truth will never stay silent forever. Just when Gabriel Vaughn thought justice had been served, for Julian and for a nation betrayed by a corrupted bench, a new nightmare emerged, clawing its way back from behind prison bars. Genevieve Clark, with a face untouched by remorse, appeared in a smuggled prison video. In it, she declared herself a victim of a black conspiracy to dismantle the true white America. The footage spread like wildfire through extremist channels, igniting not only outrage, but a wave of hate-fueled protests across the southern states. In the midst of tear gas, banners, and spilled blood, Gabriel's name, once spoken in admiration, was now spit out in rage. They called him a system stain, and one night, as he and Julian lay in bed, a bullet pierced the window of the boy's room. Gabriel didn't retreat. He couldn't. At a brief but seismic press conference, he faced the cameras and said, "If truth terrifies you this much, maybe it's time we start talking about that fear." His story didn't end with a verdict. It sparked a new chapter, one where hatred would be confronted not with fists, but with intellect, compassion, and resolve. He had won the courtroom, but the real war had always been beyond its walls. What do you think of this ending? Do you believe justice is strong enough to outlast the screams of hatred? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in truth, justice, and the courage to stand alone, hit subscribe. Because only when these stories are told can truth truly survive. Some battles don't end with a gavel strike in the courtroom. They begin afterward, in the silence of the community, in the unnamed fear, in the quiet moments when each of us must choose to stand with the truth or to look away. The story of Gabriel Vaughn, a black attorney who dared to confront a system rigged by power, prejudice, and fear, is more than a legal crusade to clear the name of Julian Carter, an innocent young man. It is a mirror held up to a society where truth can be distorted, not by lies alone, but by the hands of those too afraid to face it. Gabriel paid the price with his reputation, with his blood, and with the safety of his own life to protect someone he didn't even know by blood. He wasn't born to be a hero, but he chose not to be silent, and that choice made all the difference. From this story, the lesson isn't about the final victory. It's about whether we're willing to do what's right, even when we know we'll be hated, misunderstood, or left standing alone. Justice doesn't arrive on its own. It must be chosen, protected, and sometimes reclaimed through tears and unwavering courage. Live in a way that, whether anyone applauds you or not, you can still look in the mirror and say, I didn't stay silent when justice was under attack. Because in a world full of noise, real courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply refuses to back down.